Hello, everyone. My name is Alexandria Cook, and I will be presenting on the Normans, 11th century France, Bishop Odo, William the Conqueror, the Bayeux Cathedral, and finally, the Bayeux Tapestry. All of these combine to tell a story of conquest, growth, architectural movement, and political interweavings. The year is 1066. It's the 14th of October. At 9 a.m., a battle commences. The battle is only 24 hours long. However, it will be one that will change politics, social structures, language, and architecture of the country forever. Anything that reminded the English of their once political power was not allowed to stand. The wooden churches were burned down, and in their place rose the large stone cathedrals that followed the Romanesque style. A widespread political communication needed to be spread, and that was that the English were no longer in power and that the Normans held control. The French needed to become the nobleman's language. Aristocracy needed to change hands. Religion and the English church needed to be updated to be, well, more Norman. And most importantly, the large stone cathedrals that were being built over Anglo Saxon timber churches needed to communicate power. Bishop Odo, the half brother of William the Conqueror, and considered to be the second most powerful person in England, built such a cathedral to communicate this power. In order to impress upon the English even further the Norman power of their Norman power, a massive tapestry was commissioned by the bishop himself that documented the Battle of Hastings and the Normans' control of England. Cathedrals were an important element in the societal and political structure of Normandy, and were therefore quite prevalent within the country. So, what made the Bayeux Cathedral stand out above the rest? I argue that the Bayeux Tapestry elevated the architecture of the cathedral and helped promote its architectural power and political standing. So, where is Normandy? Normandy. Who are the Normans? And how did they come into power? Normandy was originally inhabited during the Paleolithic era, nestled between the Seine and Eure valleys and what is now the northwestern part of France. During the Paleolithic era, much of the area was covered in glaciers, making it uninhabitable. There is some evidence of the nomadic civilizations that lived within the area, as evidenced by artifacts found within the caves surrounding the area. Because of the mountainous area and the inhospitable climate, it was also very difficult for the area to form any type of civilization, like Egypt. As the glaciers began to melt, Celtic tribes or clans began to crop up along the coast. Much of the climate at this time was very cold and wet. In 56 BCE, Julius Caesar conquered the region, pushing the area under Roman jurisdiction, eventually Christianizing the inhabitants in the 3rd and 4th centuries. The coast was a very volatile area and constantly under raids by the Vikings from the 8th century moving forward. This would have been a very cataclysmic time for those living in the area. Over time, the region gave way to Viking control as they moved further inland, taking control of the area around Rouen and the cessation of the French King Charles. Large bands of Scandinavian Vikings immigrated into the area, adopted the French language, and became known as Normans, settling in the area of Normandy. In 911 CE, Charles the Simple validated the Norman possessions of Rouen, France. With incredible speed, the Normans renounced paganism and embraced Christianity and began to grow in strength and numbers. The Normans were a very strong, strategic, and militaristic group of people. Sweeping down from the north and along the coast, they quickly overran England and expanded into other territories, including Italy, Scotland, Wales, and the Byzantine Empire. This is a good explanation for why their culture and architectural language was so diverse. Enter William the Conqueror. Born in 1027 in Normandy as the illegitimate son of Duke Robert I. Because of his illegitimacy, William was in constant state of needing to defend his title as Duke. As such, he quickly learned the ins and outs of the public diplomacy. William married Matilda of Flanders in 1031, and through his diplomatic marriage, William glued the gap between the fighting regions and cemented his power as leader of France. Over the space of 20 years, William's diplomatic power and military strategies would prove as a formidable force throughout Normandy. As William moved west, he strengthened his power of political diplomacy, becoming even more ambitious. William began to set his eyes on the throne of England. The Battle of Hastings is an important event within Norman history, as it marks the day William the Conqueror took hold of England and established his position as king. It was only a short battle, only lasting a day. However, the success of the battle was a result of meticulous planning over the space of several years, as well as other battles throughout the country. Utilizing the already governing infrastructure of the Anglo-Saxons, William exploited their organization tactics to his advantage. Within the Anglo-Saxon boroughs, there were shires. These shires were expected to report to the king at regular times. That was well known throughout the country. Knowing that the lords and the political powers would be gathered in one spot was extremely helpful to William. Surrounding the shires, and with no hope of escape, the landholders of the shire were forced to give up land, and, in an attempt to save their own lives, gave away the land of others. These small battles were critical wins for William. In September of 1066, William set up camp near the south of England. Harold Godwin attempted to perform a sneak attack on the army waiting for them, but to their surprise they were intercepted. William met Harold on the battlefield, and the fighting began. The most notable reason for the Normans' quick defeat was their battle attack. Pretending to retreat, the Normans backed off the battlefield and ran to the forest. As Harold's army chased after, William's army swiftly turned around, cornering the army. The battle was quickly won, and the Anglo-Saxon king, Harold Godwinson, was killed at dusk, forcing the Anglo-Saxon army to retreat. William the Conqueror was now crowned king on Christmas Day in 1066 and marked the beginning of the Norman conquest of England. The Normans quickly began to build castles that they lived in for a short period near the chief shires that held the most power. With the landholders now absent, the Normans built looming castles that overlooked the land and subsequently dried the remaining Saxons of their resources and ability to maintain the land. Once they could no longer hold on to the land, they were forced to assimilate. These castles were practically the most important factor in the conquest of Normandy. According to the Orderic Vitalis, the English would never have conquered if they had possessed castles of their own. There is much to be said about the conquest of England. The most important aspect of the conquest of England was the Normans' ability to quickly transform the religious, political, mercantile language, and architecture of England so quickly. Utilizing the already structured government, political power, and commerce infrastructure, William successfully infiltrated and built upon the already balanced system. The fact that such a structured system could change the political arena into a feudalist society within the space of several years was astounding. Exploiting the already structured system allowed the Normans to reform the English church, making it more Norman, as well as further develop the Romanesque style, allowing them to gain very quickly in strength and riches. The newly conquered kingdom contained a plethora of different cultural ideas and influences reaching clear to the continental Europe, Scandinavia, and elsewhere. One of the most substantial and influential changes to England was the transformation of the village and agrarian-based geography of the Anglo-Saxons into one of a thriving trade and farming acropolis, containing at the center of each a castle. These castles were important because they were a symbol of power. They towered over the inhabitants below, reminding them of the control the Normans held over them. At the end of the 12th century, most of the old timber churches of the Anglo-Saxons had been torn down and rebuilt in the Norman style. The pre-conquest architecture was mainly formulated out of timber framing and was relatively small. Very little remains from this period because of the fragility of the buildings, the volatility of the area, and the destruction of the conquest. To the Normans, this type of architecture was weak. Most villages contained small wooden huts with thatched roof systems and wattle and daub walls. These buildings were not meant to be permanent and were continually reconstructed and moved as needed. If you were a wealthy nobleman, you probably had a hall with a central fireplace and a hole in the roof to allow smoke to escape. Floors were dug into the ground, allowing for better insulation, and sometimes even contained a basement for storage. Very few windows were used, so much of the space was dark. These one-room buildings would house an entire family. It didn't make sense to settle down when in constant state of friction. The only type of architecture that was more permanent was their churches, consisting constituting a simple nave divided by a rectangular chancel and a narrow arch. These churches were the heart of the country. There is an obvious note of simplicity within them. Undecorated doors and windows almost look boxy from the outside. The most prominent aspect of Anglo-Saxon architecture was the church towers. Originally built as a lookout and then transformed into a haven, these towers contained small rooms with a ladder that could be pulled up in times of danger. A lot of the a lot of time and effort was put into these buildings and these church towers. While most of the architecture was timber-based, the Anglo-Saxons did turn to masonry within their churches. Using long, thin, and vertical stones called pilaster strips and bulky end caps, they were placed in patterns of vertical and horizontal configurations called long and short work. Post-conquest architecture, on the other hand, was much more robust and diverse. This was due to their influence on the European continent. The Normans needed a way to showcase their power over the Anglo-Saxons. The most critical was the building of castles and cathedrals. By this mechanism, the Normans were able to successfully overcome and outrank the subject of English, as well as permanently impose their permanent conquest. The Normans moved quickly and demolished most of the Anglo-Saxon buildings and rebuilt in their style the massive towering castles and cathedrals that still stand today. Moving completely away from the somewhat crude masonry of the English, the Normans incorporated their twist on the new widespreading Romanesque style of Europe. The diversity of the Normans meant that much of their architecture drew on the Byzantine and other cultural areas and incorporated that into their style. One prime example of this architecture was Durham Cathedral. The main feature of this type of style was the ribbed vaulting and the half-attached columns. The grandeur of the main hall and the way the ribbed vaulting and columns moved the eye upward were very important to the newly established religious ideology. The Norman influence on the Romanesque style can be seen in the reduction of solid walls, regularized arches, and framed openings. Columns were decorated with intense colors of red and black and contained beautiful zigzag and chevron patterns that moved the eye around the building. These large cathedrals and castles loomed over the small boroughs, reminding the residents of the power of the Normans. Within all of the rebuilding of England and the exertion of power, William's half-brother and second in line to the throne before the conquest of Normandy was Bishop Odo. Bishop Odo was a powerful bishop and needed to ensure that his power was revered by those around him. Most of the histories of Bishop Odo are essentially a self-biography. Odo was so eager to assert his power that he wrote himself into the Battle of Hastings, even though it was likely that he was not there. He also considered himself to be a literary patron. Of all the many tactics that Bishop Odo took to assert his power, the most famous and politically powerful one was the Bayeux Cathedral. After Rouen, Bayeux was the second largest city in Normandy. After being named Bishop of Bayeux, Odo needed a way to communicate his power, especially after the conquest of Normandy. Construction on the Bayeux Cathedral commenced before Bishop Odo took power. It was finished in July of 1077 and consecrated by William, Duke of Normandy and King of England. This cathedral was built in the Norman Romanesque style and was where King Harold Godwinson was forced to take an oath and swear fealty to the king before the Battle of Hastings. After taking damage in the 12th century, the cathedral was rebuilt in the Gothic style. Shortly after the widespread buildings of cathedrals came the popular act of taking pilgrimages. The growth and popularity of these pilgrimages meant cathedrals needed to house relics to draw patronage. The most venerated and popular pilgrimage was that of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. This pilgrimage was thought to hold the tomb of Christ. Churches were built specifically to hold these relics. Norman Romanesque cathedrals were built specifically for the movement of relics within the church. Most churches in this style contained a high altar in the back of the church, allowing the relics to be displayed and venerated throughout the cathedral. Bishop Odo, noticing the popularity of this act and eager to assert his power and dominance, also looked to these types of relics to create patronage and traffic to his cathedral. While the relics Bishop Odo had were mediocre value, he did have one item that wasn't a relic, but would bring Normans from afar just to see it. It was something that communicated power, wealth, and strength of conquest. The Bayeux Tapestry is commonly believed to be commissioned by Bishop Odo. It was designed to be hung around the chancel of his cathedral on the day of Feast of Relics. The tapestry displays William the Conqueror's invasion of Normandy. Bishop Odo is strategically placed 4 times within the tapestry. The 2 significant appearances occur while advising William, the Duke of Normandy, and again when in battle at Hastings. The Bayeux Tapestry is not considered to be an official tapestry, and it was not created on a loom and woven into fabric. Instead, the Bayeux Tapestry is embroidered linen, sewn meticulously together. Rising at 2 feet in height and approximately 200 feet in length, narrow bands of fabric are sewn together and contain pictorial narratives much like a triptych. The narrative is embroidered in the popular fashion of the time and almost acts like a silent film. There is dynamism to the artwork and fashioned on the piece. So, what does the Bayeux Tapestry tell us today? Much like a historical film, the Bayeux Tapestry is full of exaggerations and lofty tales. For example, while Bishop Odo shows himself fighting in the Battle of Hastings, it is more likely that he was instructed and even commanded by William, Duke of Normandy himself not to fight. Liberties are taken throughout the piece, making the Normans, and specifically the Duke himself, seem powerful, endearing, and favorable. Because the Anglo-Saxons would have also seen this tapestry, King Harold is shown as being courageous, yet beset by his faults, making foolish decisions that finally lead to his demise. The tapestry is full of propaganda intended to communicate power and strength. Hanging this tapestry within the Bayeux Cathedral would have sent a clear message to all those who made the pilgrimage to that location. What can we take away from this? Much of the history we read today is usually shed in a light that is favorable to the recorder. It teaches us to ask questions, reach secondary sources, and try to interpret the works outside our view. Without researching further and looking to other sources, the Bayeux Tapestry can be misleading. Understanding the tone and meaning of the piece is extremely important, but pushing the boundaries of that further is even more important. There are many interesting and less known facts about the Bayeux Tapestry. For starters, it was a long time accepted that Queen Matilda commissioned the tapestry. If this were true, it would significantly change the tone of the artwork itself, especially concerning William and Bishop Odo. Other misconceptions of the tapestry arrive in its deciphering. It can be difficult to understand some of the iconography today, as the entire work is laid out pictorially. One example of this confusion comes through Lady Algefia. No one quite knows who she is and why she is portrayed within the tapestry. In one figure, we see her standing in discussion in the palace of William of Normandy, wherein Harold is attempting to ascend the English throne. In the end, both William and Harold become king. Harold is shortly dethroned after going back on his promise to give William the throne, subsequently leading to the Battle of Normandy and the succession of kings. E. A. Freeman states in his History of the Norman Conquest, "There is no representation in the whole of the tapestry which is more thoroughly puzzling than this one. Who is the lady bearing a purely English name? Who is thus suddenly introduced? What bearing had her presence on the general course of the story to account for the prominent position thus given her?" Scholars have many theories on who she may be and why she was such an important figure within the tapestry. But as of right now, we have no conclusive evidence of who she was, what she stood for, and what she stood for. There are several examples of this throughout the tapestry that are continually being studied and reimagined. Throughout all of its history and everything leading up to its point, it can be seen how the tapestry was a symbol of power. Its propaganda stories were created so that even the illiterate could understand them. The simple imagery was designed in such a way as to be able to be read from afar. This tapestry was a message for all to hear. With as many cathedrals and castles being built around Normandy and England, communicating clear power was important. There's little to be found about the Bayeux Cathedral, other than the fact that it was built in the Norman Romanesque style, was damaged in the 14th century, and was subsequently rebuilt in the Gothic style. What stands out and has stood out throughout history has interestingly been the tapestry. The tapestry brought the architecture to life in a way. The tapestry reinforced the architectural power, which reinforced Normandy and the king's power. Today, the tapestry resides near its birthplace in Bayeux, near the cathedral. The pictorial narrative found within the tapestry, in conjunction with the cathedral, communicated immense power. I can imagine what it would have been like to walk into the enormous cathedral looming over the town, knowing that the events that occurred within. Walking into the cathedral itself must have been an impressive sight alone, albeit not much different from all the other cathedrals built during the era. So, what made the cathedral so different and awe inspiring? I would argue that the tapestry draped along the walls above the altar. I can imagine walking in the Romanesque architectural style, drawing my eye upward, and then, in all of its glory, residing at the story of power and conquer and those who stood beside him. The tapestry strengthened that power, complemented the architecture, and worked hand in hand to tell a story that all could read. The tapestry was meant for everyone to see. It too was meant to loom over and stand as a reminder. I can imagine the emotion that would have likely been invoked in a person. The tapestry elevated the architecture and helped it stand even stronger as a symbol of power. So, how is everything connected? The Normans were a powerful group of people, beginning with the Vikings, slowly taking over the French coast of Normandy. As they took over there arose a real need to communicate the power of the people they conquered. The best way to do that was to reconstruct language, religion, art, and most importantly, architecture. Pushing the boundaries of the Romanesque style, the Normans created their specific version of what was created as an oppressor or reminder of the government that now was, communicating that power by reconstructing town layouts and placing massive castles and cathedrals overlooking the inhabitants below. Due to the need to politically display this authority and power with even stronger prowess, Bishop Odo and William the Conqueror created a massive tapestry specifically to reside among the relics of the Bayeux Cathedral. This tapestry conveyed even more power, complemented the architecture, and improved political and social status of those it portrayed. It complemented the architecture. The tapestry and the architecture worked hand in hand to create a narrative that spoke to the power of the Normans and specifically their leaders. Through these investigations, it's easy to see how the power of architecture and design was effectively conveyed. The use of architecture helped to display an authoritative stance and explanation of permanent invasion. The tapestry, however, complemented the architecture and in a way helped it to stand out. It is in this way that we can look beyond the overall structure and design of a building and examine closer how specific elements can increase communication more effectively. How can a tapestry communicate a message in architecture today? Should it be communicated in such a way? The Bayeux Tapestry and the architecture that housed the tapestry show us the power that these design types can have and the design elements that they can create.